In the previous tutorial we spoke about creating this custom program that asks the user to guess a number between 0 and 100 and then guesses the correct number within the fewest amount of tries. In this tutorial we're going to now move this program, if you will, this piece of code into its own class to keep it organized and make it more meaningful. We're going to keep that class clean and easy to browse through by making use of regions. We're going to create functions to expose things, such as asking the question and then trying to do, make a guess, if you will, and then finally report the findings at the end. And then we're going to use that class inside of the main function in order to then do what the program originally did. So as we spoke about in the tutorial previously, classes are things that contain other information. So they contain these properties and variables, and they can contain the functions that we need, and many other things. So we're going to make use of a class in order to consolidate this program. Instead of being just a big dump of code here, it's going to be a nice class that can be created and used throughout the application. So start by right clicking on your project, do add class. I'm going to call this number guesser. So it's created this class for us. I like to prepend all the classes with public, so it's obvious that this class is now publicly accessible. I don't like to leave things undefined and leave it up to misinterpretation, so add the word public. So this class is called number guesser. Now when we comment code we use these 2 forward slashes, and that's good. That's non-exportable comments. That's comments that stay within your application and are for your own use. Now if we do things like console.readLine and we wait, you'll see reads the next line of characters from the standard input. So this is a comment that the developers added to this function readLine, so that other developers like us that want to use this function get some information. So this is an XML comment, and we want to add these to our class as well, so it's nice and handy when we consume our class. So to do that, just before the class name, just here, put 3 forward slashes, and this will automatically do a summary statement. This is an exportable comment. So we're going to give this class some detailed information now, and it's basically what our program does. So it's going to ask the user for a number and find that number out in the fewest possible turns. So now let's take a look at this comment, how it looks when we go to consume this class. So you create an instance of a class just the same way as you create variables, but instead of using integer or boolean or any other variable name, you actually specify the name of the class. So there you can see number guesser. So we can do number guesser, and then we'll call it number guesser as the variable name, equals new number guesser. And that's now created an instance of the class, so just like you'd create an instance of a variable. And what I didn't show you is on the constructor, the thing that instantiates the class, or rather on the definition over here, because this is the definition at the top. You hover over number guesser and there's our comment. Ask the user to guess a number between a certain range. So now when somebody else comes to use your class, they're going to have some comments on what it's doing and what it's expecting. We're again going to comment our code, create a new instance of our number guesser class. And now is also a good time to mention the use of var. So you can see here we specify number guesser as the variable, the type, and then we go ahead and create an instance of it here with new number guesser. Same here, when we make an integer, we specify int, give it the name, and then we set it to the value. Now the thing is, Visual Studio is smart enough to realize that if you're specifying 100 by default, it's going to try and create an integer anyway. It's going to try and make the variable of that type. Same if we were to do a boolean and we do true. And again, you can see it's going to try and use a boolean by default. So instead of specifying the type of variable all the time, when you're specifying a variable and then assigning it at the same time, you can use a shortcut. So instead of typing the variable name, you simply type var. And that just means it's a variable, but the type of that variable is going to be defined on the opposite side of the operator. So in this case, we haven't specified the exact type, we've just said it's a variable with this name, and this is what we want it to be, a new number guesser. So now Visual Studio has actually created a number guesser variable for us. So you want to make use of this var as much as possible. So we've now got a new instance of the class, and we need to start shifting this code over into a class in some meaningful way. So the first thing is here. Ask the user to think of a number between, well, no, actually, let's put the variables in first. So let's take these variables, cut them out with Control-X, go into the class, and inside here, let's just paste them for now so we know what they are. And now, because these are by default, because there's nothing specified, these are private variables, they won't be accessible to this class. So if we did number guesser, there's nothing available. We can't then change those values or use them. And in classes, instead of using variables, what we like to use is properties. So a property is just in essence a variable, but a property has what's called a getter and a setter. So let's just go ahead and turn this one into a property, and we'll make it public at the same time so that it can be accessed. So it's a public integer, and you can't use var in this case because we're not going to define this value here, and even if we do, we still need to specify the type because a public property is something different than a variable. It's not directly a variable, so we can't use the var in this instance. So it's a public integer, and then max. So max is now no longer a useful name in terms of this class now trying to set or configure this number guesser. So max is a bit non-descriptive. So we're going to change this to, and we're going to also start with a capital because this is a public property, and by convention that's just what I like to do, is to start anything public in a class with a capital letter. So we're going to call this maximum number. We can just call it maximum number because we're going to add a comment. So now we mentioned before, well, let's finish making this a property. So to turn this into a property, it's similar to a function. You open and close the curly brackets. Inside, for shorthand for now, and we'll go over properties in another video in more detail, but for now just type get semicolon set semicolon. And that's enough to turn what was a variable now into a public property. And then thanks to C#6 we can actually still assign a default value to that property directly. So we've done that right afterwards. So all you have to do, let's do it to the guesses. You make it public, you keep the integer, you capitalize the letter, you don't have to, but that's again preference. We're going to just give this a better name as well. So we'll call this current number of guesses. And then you do the curly brackets, get semicolon, set semicolon, close curly brackets. So these have become public properties. Let's finish off with these. Public integer, current guess minimum. And then current guess maximum. Now for these two, you can see here we can't use a number directly as an initial value, so we can't make use of this number here. That's just how things are. But because we can run, we're going to make a function that can run our program, that can run the guesses, if you will, the system that says, right, pick a number, and then goes through the guesses. And these two are, they need to be reset each time you run the program. We don't need to define them by default here anyway. So simply remove the values. Current number of guesses is again the same as below. That's going to change every time we run. So the only one we're going to define a default value is the maximum number. Now, we want to also comment these properties just like we commented the class. So it's exactly the same, we just put 3 forward slashes instead of 2. And then we'll just go ahead and move this existing comment in. Add back the 3rd slash. And then define maximum number of get. Now this is a comment to ourselves, so this is sort of a non-English sentence, if you will. It's shorthand, it's just define maximum number of the user can guess. We want to be more explicit because this is what another person that hasn't written this code is typically going to read. So we want to define this as the largest number we ask the user to guess between 0 and this number. And then same here, we'll just 3 forward slashes, and then we're going to type in the current number of guesses a computer has had. The current known minimum number the user is thinking of. Copy that, paste the current known maximum. So we now have public properties instead of the variables, and comments on all of them. So if we go to our program, and then to access anything inside of this class, we use the variable name, so we type number guesser, and then put a dot. Now you can see we've got all these values. So we've got current guess maximum, and there's our comment, the current known maximum number the user is thinking of. And you've got them for all the comments. Now, because we defined here get and set, that means that this class that's making use of our other class, this number guesser, it can get the value, but it can also set the value. Now, the current number of guesses and the current min and max, although we want to expose those properties so that this class could make use of them if it liked, we don't want this class to be able to go and change these values because they are critical to the function of the program. They're something that you know, the user should not be changing. The what we call read only, or getters only. They're not to be set by an external program because that would throw off the way the program works. The program isn't expecting these values to be changed by anything except itself. Whereas the maximum number, we're going to allow this to be changed, so then outside in this class, the user can go ahead and say maximum number equals 200 and tweak effectively the way the program is going to work. So we're going to leave this as a getter setter, but in order to make these not settable by anything except this class itself, simply add the accessor private before the word set. So it's now got a private set, which means only this class itself can set the value. So if we then went to try and change, say, the current guess maximum, we're going to get a warning that the property or index of current guess maximum cannot be used because it is inaccessible, basically. So it's saying we can't reach it in order to set the value. So that's good enough for us. That's now protecting our variables. Now, we've done creating a class, so we've effectively spun up this number guesser class. And then we've now added some public properties. So we're going to move down to regions because this class is going to have public properties. It's going to have a constructor, which is this thing here. When you create a new version of the class, this is a function, you'll notice. It's effectively calling the default, what's called a constructor of a class, a function inside the class that always runs when it's created. And then we're going to have functions in general for doing the actions that we want. So this class is going to start becoming very large, and with these comments as well, it would start looking, hard to read and hard to find. So we can minimize the comment by clicking the little minuses, and that makes it a little bit nicer. But then we also want to group things. So these are all public properties. So what we're going to do is make a region, and to do that, just go above where we want to group all this. So just above this, we put a hash, and then type the word region and a space, and then we give it the name, and we're going to call it public properties. And then we're going to go to the end of where this region is, this group. We're going to type hash and end region. And what that allows us to do is simply use this minus sign here next to the region. And that will collapse this into a nice box. And you can hover over and see what's in, or you could expand again. And it just allows us to group inside purely this window, just the visual way of inspecting code. It allows us to group and minimize sections of the class so that it's nice and easy to read. So we've grouped those into public properties. Now I mentioned this constructor, and you'll say, well, that's a function, and yet this class has no functions. Which is true, but by default, all classes have what's called a default constructor. And that just means when you create the class, it accepts no values, it simply gets created when everything is in its default state. And I always like to create that constructor, and in order to do that, it's effectively a function, and there's a shorthand to creating one. So inside the class, just click anywhere inside the class, type the word ctor, and then press the tab key twice. And it's going to create you the constructor. Now you can type this by hand. All you have to do is type the word public, so that this class, when it's creating it, can actually access the function. And you'll notice there's effectively no return value, and that's what makes it a constructor. You've got the exact same name as the class, which is also required, and there's no return value. So normally you'd need to have void or integer or your return value. A constructor is special because it has no return value, and it's got the exact same name as the class. So this is now the constructor, and this is code that if you wanted to do something, so say when they create this new class, and then you want to set up some values. So how we've got the maximum number right now is 100. Let's get rid of that there. And instead, you could actually do it inside here in the constructor. So we could do this dot maximum number equals 100, and that's going to set the value of maximum number to 100 as soon as this line has been run, this has been created. Obviously we're going to change it here afterwards, but you typically use the constructor to create default values. Again, let's add a comment to this, 3 forward slashes, and just call it default constructor. And then again, remember to comment everything you're doing. Set default maximum number. And then we also want to put a region around this. So hash region, and I usually put ctor, dot ctor. Again, that's just a preference, that's what I've been doing for years, and that's what I do, and that to me signifies constructor. And then you can minimize that. And let's go ahead and just run this now to see what happens here. So I'm going to put a breakpoint. I'll put it right here on line 44, so we know we should hit this breakpoint when the class is created. I'm going to have to just temporarily cut this code out because nothing will work right now because we've moved the variables. So I'll just cut that away. And then we'll also put a breakpoint here, so that once the class has been created, we can inspect the value of maximum number, then we can change it and inspect again. And I'll put one here. So press F5 to run. And you can see it's stopped in code. So we've got a number guesser variable that hasn't been created yet. We press F10 to just step over, and that'll then carry on running until the next breakpoint. The next thing it's hit is it's gone inside of this default constructor, as we said. And the maximum number right now is 0 because the default value of an unassigned integer is 0. It's then going to set the maximum number to 100, as you can now see. We'll press F5 to let the program continue to run until it hits the next breakpoint. So it's now created the class, as you can see. You can also expand. You can see the maximum number's been set to 100, so that's done what we expected. When you create a new instance of that class, the default values are set, so the maximum number is set to 100. And then here we're going to change that value from 100 to 200, and you can see there it's changed. So that's the constructor. That's the thing that runs when the class is created. You've got your public properties, which you can think of as your variables in the previous program, but now they are properties so that our main function can access them, such as this. And now we want to create our first function. So here in code we say ask the user to think of a number. So really this is the start of the program, if you will. This is when we were saying, right, we've set up the maximum number, now we're ready to go ahead and run that and guess the numbers. Now we could just put this all in one function and call it something like run or guess or whatever we want to call it, but just again so you get more used to creating more functions, we're going to break this down into several functions. It's not meant as a functional real-world class. It's more of the concept of what a class is and what it does. So let's take this part of our code that was to ask the user to effectively inform the user of what number to think of between what and what. So let's cut that code, go to our class, and then we're going to create a new function. So again, public, so that it can be accessed by the main function. And we're not going to return anything because it's simply asking the user, telling the user to think of a number. We don't expect anything back. We don't need any information back from the user or information back to the caller right now. So it's a void. We don't return anything. And we're going to call this, let's call it inform user. And the way we create the function is open and close the parentheses, and then create a set of curly braces. So we have, it's publicly accessible, it returns nothing, and it's called inform user. We also have nothing being passed in. There's no parameters inside these parentheses, which means such as when we do console.writeLine and we pass in a string, that's a variable, such as here. The thing that calls main can pass in an array of strings. So we're saying we don't need any information from the caller, from this guy here that we're going to then call. It just simply needs to inform the user. We can then paste our existing code in there, and that's good enough. We ask the user to think of a number, and now here between 0 and 100, 100 is no longer valid. It's now between 0 and our maximum number, because it's now a variable. So call this maximum number. And then we also need to change the string, because now we're explicitly asking the user between 0 and 100, and it's not. It's between 0 and this maximum number. So we put the $sign at the start of the string. This allows us to then use curly braces inside the string and place a variable. So we're going to do this .maximum number. So now it's going to say, I want you to think of a number between 0 and this maximum number. And that's a function. So again, we need to comment this function, 3 forward slashes, and we'll say, ask the user to think of a number from the maximum number. So now we can call this function, which will then effectively run this code. So let's go back, and where we've removed the previous code, let's now replace it with the new classes function. So we do number guesser dot, and now you can see we have inform user, and there's our comment. Ask the user to think of a number between 0 and the maximum number. And to call a function, you simply type the name of it, and then you just open and close parentheses and semicolon to finish the line. So right now, as we've been moving code into the class, we've been replacing them with the actual making use of the class and calling those variables and functions as well. Let's just add a comment here as well. Change the default maximum number to 200, and then ask the user to think of a number. So we've done classes, regions, we've just created a function, we're going to create a few more. And using classes we're already doing right now, this is using a class. So already we've pretty much covered the topic of the tutorial, but we'll keep going, we'll get more used to how this is all going to come together and effectively keep the exact same logic but make it much nicer and again easier to read, as well as easier to use in multiple places, or again, once you do more real world applications, which we'll get onto in a few tutorials, you'll realize the benefit of making a class instead of just dumping a load of code inside a function. It's always good to keep your code small and clean and organized and customizable. So already by creating this class, we've naturally added a way to easily customize the function of that class, the function of what it's expected to do. We can now change the maximum number nice and easy. So now we've informed the user. The next step is really this whole while statement. This is effectively taking the guesses. This is finding out the number. So this is, I'd say, call it discover number. So select this entire while call and cut that away. Go back to your number guesser. Let's create another function. Call it public. We again don't need to return anything, and we'll call this discover number. We don't need to accept any parameters. Give this a comment. Ask the user a series of questions to discover the number they are thinking of, and paste our code in. And all we have to do is really just change where we have the previously defined variables to now use our public properties. So guess min, we can just do this dot guess minimum. Max is this dot guess maximum, because we're not changing the function of the program so much. We're mainly organizing it and putting it into a class. So for the most part, everything is just the same. We just need to make sure we're changing the name of all these variables to be the correct public properties. And you want to be careful when you do this that you don't make any typos, you don't accidentally use a different variable, because then you would be changing the function of the program. So that's everything replaced inside that function. So now that function should run exactly the same as the code that was previously here. So now we just call that new function. So we'll call discover number. And then this last part really is the report. This is announcing the discovery, if you will. So we'll just select those 3 lines, cut them, do exactly the same, go back to the number getter class, add a new function, doesn't return anything, and we'll say announce results, and paste that code in, and then change the variables. Give it a comment, 3 forward slashes. And then call the function in the main class. And now you can see our main function looks much nicer. We have create a new instance of a number guesser class, so we create the instance. We want to change the default maximum number the user can guess to 200. Then going to ask the user, we're going to inform the user, which effectively asks them to think of a number. We're then going to discover that number, and then we're going to announce the results. And hopefully you can see already that how more descriptive this code has become. So instead of looking at what was a big, just long list of code, we've now got a fairly well-defined, almost human-readable code. So number guesser is the variable name, but it's also descriptive that it helps us understand. So it's clearly trying to guess a number. We can see that we're setting a maximum number. Then we can see at this point we're informing the user. And then when we're at this point, we're discovering the number. And then at this point, we're announcing results. So it's a lot more human readable. It's not like you're flicking through this code and saying, while this and do that. This is a lot more detailed. This is exactly what the program's doing. But in terms of then making use of this code, we don't want to be just dumping this entire code, and we want to, each part, each chunk of the code, each chunk of your program has now got a nice function. It's broken it down into smaller parts, and that's always a good thing in code, to keep things really small. Your functions want to be nice and small and compact and do a small job. You know, lots of little jobs put together. So this should now do exactly what we did before. So let's first see if this program will build. So we'll do Control, Shift and B. And you can see it's built successfully, so that's a good start. Now, let's just change this back to 100 for now, because first, before we start messing with the program, we want to run it and make sure that it does what it used to do, because we've effectively done quite a lot of changes here. And let's also wrap these public functions in a region, because you can see again now, these are nice, public properties, constructor, but now you've just got this, again, this dump of code starting to happen. So let's just create a new region called public, and I'll call them methods, because when we get more in depth about more advanced things on C#, you'll realise there's things called actions and functions. And these things, although they are functions, again, there's various names for this type of thing, and now more commonly it can be called more of a method, because a function is something that is now a defined thing in C#. You can have a function and an action, so we'll call them methods. So if you hear the word method or you hear the word function, typically when you hear the word function, it's referring to the same thing. It's referring to this, which is a function. If you hear method, it's exactly the same thing. It's a function. So it's the same thing, just a different name. So let's clean that up. So you can see how nice and easy this class is to then navigate and find things. So we want to know what happens when we create this class. We go to CTOR, double click. You've got this nice little constructor. You want to check out the variables, in this case the public properties. You just go into the public properties section. You want to see some functions of what's happening, you can expand this and then go to those set functions. So it's broken all that code down and sort of organized it into a structure. So again, it's easy for you to navigate and find out things that you need to find out. So let's just press F5 and run this and make sure everything still works as it did previously. So there's a good start. I want you to think of a number between 0 and 100. Now you remember this string was actually changed. So our code went to inform user, and we edited the original code and changed from 0 to 100 to put the actual public property, which is maximum number, which also means our default constructor has actually run this code in order to change it to 100. So even though it looks the same, that's actually a good thing. We now know this code and this function specifically are working. Let's just stop that and change this to 200. We'll change it back in a moment. F5 to run again. And you can see now it's saying think of a number between 0 and 200. So we know that's now working. Pressing enter, your number is 0 guessed in 0 guesses. So we can see something's gone wrong already. So let's just first change this back to 100. Run and press enter. So yeah, we can see right now this has gone wrong. And now I know what's gone wrong, because if you remember, we go to the number classes, number guesses. Remember when we created these public properties and we were defining these, we were changing them from variables into public properties, and I mentioned that these three change every time we want to effectively now run this discover number function, because at the point of running the discover number is when we, well, really at the point of inform user, because we're outputting the number they want to guess, but either way, if we put it inside the discover number, it's good enough. We need to initialize the current min and current max guess. So by default, these are 0 and 0. So what's happened, because we never replaced them with the original code, which was, if you remember, this was max divided by 2, which is effectively this dot maximum number divided by 2, like that. We're not going to put it there, but that's effectively what was there. Because we then come into here, and this while is while the guess min isn't equal to the guess max, they're equal at the start because they're both 0. So basically what we need to do in the discover number is then initialize the variables. So we want to change the maximum to what it used to be. Let's start current guess max as that. We also want to make sure, because again, what could happen now, because this isn't a set of code that just runs from top to bottom, this is done by functions here that we call. We could do number guesses.discover number, number guesses.discover number. We could call it twice. We might want to do that for any reason. If we were to do that, and we ran it once, and this while loop ran, it increased the current number of guesses, and then it finished, but then we called it again. When it starts off at what should be a brand new loop, the number of guesses is not 0 anymore, it's from the previous run. So now it's going to increase even further and be invalid. So we need to maintain the state of the program now. We need to make sure that when we're calling these functions, that these three properties, which are really need to be defaulted every time you're running this code instead of in the constructor, we need to make sure they're all set. So before you discover a number, you want to make sure the current number of guesses is 0. So we'll put clear variables to their initial values before a discovery. So number of guesses is 0. The current max guess is going to start off with it being half of the maximum number, and the minimum is 0. So that should fix that issue now. So that's still on 100. So let's run the program with F5 again. I want you to think of a number between 0 and 100, so press enter. And there's the familiar sign. Is your number between 0 and 50? So let's just answer yes to everything, which I believe should bring us to the number 0. So yes, is it between 0 and 25? Yes. Yes, 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 yes. And there we go. And then this part here, your number is 0, guessed and 8 guesses, is effectively the announced results because the discover number's finished. So that's a good sign. It all looks the same. So again, the exact same function of the program here. It's all operating the same. But what we've done is we've taken all that big dump of code from the main. We've constructed a class. We've put it all into nice organized sections. We've done regions. And then we've also made the maximum number customizable. So now let's test by changing the maximum number from 100 to 200. And let's run again with F5. And that's good. It's now think of a number between 0 and 200. And there we go. It's now asking us between 0 and 100, not 0 and 50, because it's half of 200. So let's answer no. Is it between 100 and 150? Sure, let's go for this. Yes, yes, no, yes, no. So let's answer no, and our number should be 120, which it is. And it guessed in 7. Let's check that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 guesses, yeah. So now our program's customizable via just changing this one variable here, which is quite cool. We can go further and we can, add more features to this and, say handle issues like maximum number. Say, I have no idea what will happen here, but let's put -1 as your number between. Think of a number between 0 and -1. Okay, your number is 0. So let's see if we can break it. -2. Ah, there we go. Is your number between 0 and -1? No. Oh, look, and we've got some kind of weird issue with an infinite loop here. And no matter what you answer, it's just an infinite loop. So we could go further, and add things like checking the maximum number to make sure it's within a valid range. It's above 0, so it's 1 or more. And we could do more things. We could continue to grow this, but this is a really basic and quite frankly boring program. We want to get on to more exciting things. So the next tutorials we're going to start creating. The way you're going to learn the rest of C# is not so much like a book will teach you and we'll go through this is a variable, this is a function, this is an event, or all that kind of training. We're going to do more things like this. We're going to create an actual program. We're going to make something that does something. And as you go, you're going to get to see how it's built. You might not understand fully, like right now where we've just created these properties. But the difference is you're going to get to create actual programs. You're going to get to do things. And it's going to keep you excited. So then you might not fully understand what you've written, but you'll get it to run. You'll understand enough to create that, and then in your own time you can, look at these and change them and maybe do some reading up and find out, or you just keep watching the videos, and as you go, you're going to understand more and more. So you're going to get really fast-tracked into learning C# without realizing. You're going to be making programs and applications that will be interesting, and as you go, you'll be chucked at a whole lot of new information very quickly. And then again, if you've got any questions on something you don't understand or something you want to ask, just ask it in the comments or send me an email, and you can get the answer that way. So to make things faster from now on, we're going to start just creating, hopefully in each video we're going to create a new application that does something different, and we'll go on to creating some visual applications. So instead of just this plain black console app, we'll go on to making some WPF applications, which are visual windows, and doing things with a file system, and try and create some interesting stuff. So stay tuned.